Um, hey everyone, my name is Isabelle. She, her pronouns. Third year right now, Russian major with a French minor. And I did the CLS virtual program this past summer because of COVID for Russian.
Mhm. Yep. My name is Shania. I'm one of the career and fellowship advisors for the Center for Life Beyond Read. I oversee many of our fellowships on and off campus and worked a lot with Isabel over last year to develop the application that ultimately ended up being a winner. And I think the first one in a really long time, if ever, for Read.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. Just a heads up, everyone, that I am also moderating the chat. So you're more than welcome to just post questions as they come up. This is going to be pretty casual. But I did want to start out, Isabel, with like, I guess, if you can think back on like, when did you start your application process, or like how long do you feel like you were involved in this application process up until like the final day of
oh
submitting your
man.
application?
So like once I decided I was going to apply for CLS, I felt I was super involved with it up until the day I had to like let it go and submit it.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I mean, it wasn't weighing on me, but it did kind of take up that amount of time. Although I also think I decided kind of not last minute, but maybe like a month before or a few weeks. I felt like the deadline was close.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think what the hardest part is that the way my process worked for these, like I think there were 5 essay questions, but like relatively short, like about half a page each.
Yep.
Um, what I remember is I had to go through at least 2 drafts. Like I think I had one, then we revised it, and I had to change a couple questions. I feel like I had to go through 2 solid drafts before I had something that I felt like this is my application, and like I am actually satisfied with like how I answered the questions. So that was the hardest thing. Like if I would imagine in my head, oh, it takes like 5 hours to answer these. I don't know how much I even thought it would take, but whatever it is I had in my head, I had to like multiply that by 3 because I had to just redo it, kind of. And it's not like it took that amount of time for like each time that I redid the draft, but it definitely took more time than I expected, and I remember that.
Hmm. Aside from me, did you have anyone else reading your drafts and giving you feedback?
You know what? Yes, I think at the very end, like when I had my final one, I think I showed it to my professor
Hmm.
in my Russian department. Yeah, 2 of them actually, I think, just because I was talking to them about this. But at that point, I was already pretty confident about it. I think I did the majority of my like working through it with you.
Yeah. And for your essays, did you, I guess, like, what was your strategy? Because it's, like you mentioned, like 5 different essays. Were you working in any way to kind of like diversify each of your answers, or like kind of like find a common theme? Like, what was kind of like your method after you looked at all of those essays?
I think I definitely went the diversify route, not even on purpose necessarily, but I did try to like pull from different experiences, and I think that was the key thing. So I tried to pull from different parts of my life. Um, well, like different things that would relate to like learning Russian. So right the summer before CLS, so like the summer right before I had applied for this, I attended an intensive language program at Middlebury,
Mhm.
which kicked my butt. That program, it taught me a lot about what it means to learn a language in immersion. And so I remember I wanted to use that because I felt like it would prove in some ways preparedness for CLS, or it would show that I had experience that connected to that. So I remember like I wanted to use that because it felt like so related. But
Mhm.
then I also wanted to draw from other things that weren't just like school. It wasn't just like Russian. So I traveled before, and I remember one of my prompts, I think, just talked about like an experience I had when I was traveling and like living abroad for like a few months. And I don't remember even concretely what the others were, but I think that was I just tried to connect as many different parts of myself as I could to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. Yeah, I'm sometimes finding that like in those initial drafts, people, can only kind of think of a couple really tangible examples to CLS directly, like anything that has to do with like language or immersion. Um, and then, that's great, but also there's so many other experiences you've had that are valuable that may not have, you know, so much to do with language, but are still giving you skills that you could help the audience to see how they might translate. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted that's a great point because those two experiences I just mentioned are like big ticket. Like those are kind of huge coincidences that I'm fortunate to have had.
Mhm.
And I don't think they're necessary at all for an application like CLS. But like you said, I think what is necessary is like finding what I would be trying to show with that story. So it's like, and one of them was like working with like listening or working with other people,
Yeah.
and just finding an experience in life where that has happened. Like really, I feel like it's more about being able to demonstrate that than about the thing that you did.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. My next question is, as we're all aware here, the CLS is funded through the State Department. It's a government funded fellowship. Um, and I think I have a lot of introductory questions from people who are like, well, I don't really like plan to work for the government, but this fellowship sounds cool.
Mhm.
Do I have to want to do that type of career to apply for this? Which of course you don't. But I guess there is one question in the essay around, like citizenship. Like you're a U.S. They want people who see themselves as an ambassador from the U.S. and are like culturally prepared. Um, but I would like to hear a little bit about like, were you hesitant at all in applying when you kind of saw that it was a government funded award?
Yeah, so I think you and I had this conversation because, well, mainly because I still wanted to apply, but I had no idea how to make it seem relevant.
Hmm.
If I remember correctly, like I think they ask you to be concrete about how you plan to use this
They
in your job. And so like basically I was going to say it's not you don't have to want to work for the government, but you kind of have to pretend like you do. And I think that's and maybe not government, but like something I don't know. I remember I made mine into like I think I incorporated restorative justice and working with other people cross like language barriers
Mhm.
because that is really interesting to me. Um, so yeah, I think that is important to find a way that it could apply, but it's not like a I don't know how to put it exactly. Not a not a deal breaker. I don't know if that's what I was going to go for, but it's important, but not important at the same time. It's one of those weird things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is hard because like the impetus of the program is that like, they have these languages that they realize not many people in the US are speaking or have the opportunity to learn to speak that are integral to like international relationships with other countries in the US, right? And so it does have this like tinge of like government incentivizing where like they're like you go learn the language, you come back and like maybe if you want to you'll work for us, right? But you don't have to. But you're right though that like you do, it's important that you think about the language you're choosing and like, you know how you're going to learn it or like continue to stay fluent once they've invested in you. Like what is your strategy for potentially coming back to Portland and finding ways to continue to speak Urdu? um, and like why Urdu
Right.
for you, And I think obviously, if you already plan to go into government, there's probably a lot of ways in which you could find like certain sectors that really value that language skill. But if not, you really want to think about like where might the job market be for somebody that has that language skill. Um,
That's actually
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say that's super important. I forgot about that part too, that they want to know how you're going to continue using this. And that's actually really vital to them.
Hmm.
And I think that I guess that goes into the what was the you said the not advocacy, ambassadorship potentially.
Hmm.
They ask about that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think they are definitely interested in like, if you already had like experience with the language, that's great. But like if you haven't, what other opportunities have you had to be an ambassador?
mhm.
Um, and like when you come back, like how can you continue to share the language potentially with others here or find community here of other language speakers now that you've learned the language? So they definitely want people who are like kind of more community oriented, I think, in like both in the country and then when you come back to the country. I'm really curious to hear because we haven't talked in a while about so you won it and then COVID happened. So,
Sad.
yeah. And I think the reality too is that, this next class of students that are applying to the award will likely be in the same situation you are, um, if they were to win, right? And so I would like to hear a little bit about, what was it like doing it remotely?
Okay, so first of all, it's super worth it. And I am so fortunate that I even got a remote position because out of all the applicants they accepted, they actually narrowed the pool for those who were able to do it online. So,
Mhm.
like, not even everyone who won the award could do the summer program online. Yeah. So I was very glad. Like, they have some sort of weird ranking system they didn't tell us about with the applications that determine like who they
Hmm.
like. Yeah. So I have no idea how that worked out. Um, but yeah, so I was really glad. It was less intense than I think it would have been. So obviously less intense because it's not immersion anymore. But also I think they factored that in because classes were way shorter. So I think if we were there in person, we would have had maybe 4 to 5 hours of classes a day.
Mhm.
Instead, we had, I think, two and maybe some days three,
Okay.
which is actually was perfect because it is, although it's not intense on the same level, it is all in a row. So it was like, for me, it was like 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And just after that, I didn't want to keep doing like Russian grammar or like conversation classes or whatever. Um, so it was pretty cool. They followed a Monday through Friday schedule. We got to meet with professors once a week individually for an hour, which was super helpful. And the best part of the CLS program, online or not, is that they give us like language partners. We get assigned them because we fill out a little questionnaire about interests, like we describe ourselves, whatever, and they try to find people. They really actually do, I think, a pretty good job trying to find people who match you. And then you're supposed to like talk with your language partner twice a week for an hour each time. But I just got paired with someone I really like. So it was amazing because it's just fun to make a friend who lives in Russia, and like we still talk. And I think actually tomorrow we're gonna talk again. But that was like the best part, is just to find someone to chat with.
Mhm. That is
Um,
great.
mhm.
Did you like in terms of like doing things virtually, how was it in terms of like building community amongst like the cohort?
So the good news is we had small groups, which is why I don't. Well, that's why I think they cut down the number of people they accepted. So there are different levels, and in ours, I think there were only 6 of us total. So it felt like, yeah, more sociable. We could really talk even during class because it wasn't super strict. Like it didn't feel like we were just answering questions and that was it. Like it was more fun than that.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think like community building was on us. So like we had a super social guy in our group who just decided to make a weekly like Zoom happy hour thing. So we would get together because of that, but like CLS didn't actually create like our social events via CLS were really with our language partner.
Mhm.
Uh, where they tried, this is the part that I think did not turn out well. They tried to do they tried to replace the cultural immersion by doing weekly Zoom like kind of like presentation group sessions with all the students, which meant like 60 people because there were like 60 students studying Russian.
Oh, and so they broke you into like little cohorts within the cohort, sub
Yep.
cohorts. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That one wasn't as fun, but I think just logistically it's harder to do with everybody, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. I think the bigger those Zoom meetings get, it's too much. And ultimately, you can't really replace physical immersion with anything, I don't think, especially over like Zoom. It's
Well, like the worst part is that they would take students because they just recently changed the regulations for the regulations like prereqs. So
Mhm.
now if you don't know any Russian, you can still apply. Before it wasn't that way, I think.
Okay.
Um, depends on the language. So they had people who like had never spoken Russian in the same group as people who'd spoken like studied for years in the same cultural like. So it's just hard to try to
Yeah.
adapt. It didn't. It was like
Yeah, I think whereas, like, if you that was the same scenario if you had physically gone to Russia, I think even students who had never started because you're physically there all day, 24/7, right? Like, would have hopefully been able to catch up a little bit quicker versus doing Zoom a few hours a week.
Actually, that is something I heard from my professors. They said that they had more students than usual who didn't know Russian or knew very little, and
Mhm.
that it was really hard for both them and the students. Like, they actually had to modify the curriculum to make it easier, and I think that's probably why. It's just there's fewer contact hours. Um,
I would
yeah.
say too, like I know I don't not everyone is learning Russian or planning to apply, but I think that's a really good point though to the students who are choosing a language that they've never ever spoken before and they're taking the opportunity to learn this language from scratch. Do you have any advice or suggestions for like what they should be doing or like given that you watched other people really struggle with this, like what is like the first week like that maybe somebody could start preparing for now so that isn't such a shock, right?
Mm. Yeah, so that's hard. I would say the online experience is probably harder if you have very limited knowledge of the language so far, because it's all taught. Like, nobody speaks English that teaches. Well, actually, that may not be true. They probably do it differently for. They probably do a mix for people who are starting. But I wasn't in those. Like, they separated us, so I never got to see what it was like.
Hmm.
Um, I actually don't. That's the funny thing. Like, even though I went through the immersion experience at Middlebury when I knew significantly less Russian, it's like, I don't know. It's hard to prepare for that, really. It's just kind of difficult. Um,
Did they make you sign the language contract where like you can't speak English when it was still remote?
no, no, not for CLS, just Middlebury. I
Um, yeah, and I mean like some things I always recommend are like you could start with Duo, like that's always a free resource like that hopefully Duo would have like some of the other less common languages, but like that you can start there. But I think that's a good point that like you should anticipate it being a little shocking.
actually, since you mentioned that, another thing I think would help because people who like native speakers just tend to speak faster.
Mhm.
One thing that helps me, although it of course depends on the level, but listening. So I listen to podcasts or news, but I'm
Yeah.
sure like you can find like different levels of speed or difficulty. But just listening to the language really, really helps.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think another one that I might recommend kind of because you pointed out speed and difficulty would be Audible and
Mm,
like audio books because then you could buy children's books in like Persian and you can actually you can slow down the speed of the speaker. So you can listen to like a book for a 3-year-old and
mhm,
you can also listen to it in like slow motion,
mhm.
right? And that's like a good resource. And also like if you were to be applying to the award and wanted to like fund for something like that, you can apply to the Career Advancement Fund, which let's talk a little bit about that too.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes with fellowships, it's a little bit, I think people don't attach like, oh, I'm applying to a fellowship and I have this financial need to the Career Advancement Fund. But they are, you know, you're allowed to apply for those types of things, even if it's for a fellowship opportunity. But for everyone watching, the Career Advancement Fund is up to $500 per school year that you are eligible to submit an application for funding to request money for anything related to career, which includes interviews, clothing for an interview, travel to an interview, fellowship costs, grad school, GRE. Um, and so, yeah, if you were applying to a fellowship and you wanted to get an Audible subscription so you could start practicing the language and buying yourself some children's books or something like that, you can apply for funding through the Career Advancement Fund.
This is more like, did Audible has books in other languages? I didn't know that. Like, they have sections like.
I mean, I would imagine they do. I mean, like it's through Amazon, so like Amazon would be silly not to offer that, but also just like I guess in general, if you could find audiobooks in that language that I'm assuming will cost money, like that would be my strategy. Um But I don't know, yeah, I'm not totally sure, like, if they would offer it in some of the less common languages, but I would try and look there, or even if you just, like, needed to go buy a book, or buy a like, a children's book online to start practicing, like, you can apply for the Career Advancement Fund for that. Um, but also, like, I think, we had covered a little bit about, like, using the Career Advancement Fund, if you need to cover, like, your visa fees.
Mhm.
Yeah, because the timeline for that is, like, really, I think what was the issue? Like, it's such a finite timeline between, like, you finding out you got awarded and then,
Mhm.
like, needing to apply to get your visa for the country, uh,
Mhm.
in time so you could depart or something like that.
Yeah, they only give you it might have been more complicated too because of COVID. I'm not really sure. It was so weird how this all happened. But they do ask for you to give for me it was an issue with my passport because they needed more time than like my passport expired next year and they
Mhm.
needed it to last longer for I think for whatever reason for the visa.
Mm,
Because it's weird. I don't know, like this it also obviously depends on the country. So Russia is just really more difficult to get a visa for from the US.
mm. Oh,
Um, yeah, and yeah, I don't even but it is complicated, and
yeah. Well, now they expect you to do that research, like, on your own, right, in preparation for the travel abroad. So it's not something that they're gonna hold your hand through necessarily the process of getting all that
Right.
kind of figured out.
Right, and sorry, I'm not like, I don't remember all the details about this specifically. I think I had a particular issue because like, I was on the cusp of, like, some dates that were okay or not okay for, like, passport,
Mhm.
and I just decided to wait because I wasn't sure I was gonna get it and because of the cost of applying for a passport. So that was, like, part of my issue.
Right. And that's, I think, ultimately something that needs to be considered, like, as you're going to apply, like, knowing that, um, if you found out you got awarded, you would need to make sure that, like, you have that stuff figured out as quickly as possible. So starting to kind of do some of that research now would probably be helpful. So then, like, to your point, like, if you are going to a country where it might be particularly hard to get everything squared away, if you're going to Russia, you know that that wait time will be a little bit longer. Um, and that's a good point, especially if you're somebody who hasn't traveled outside the US like myself. I do not know anything about these processes and would need to do some serious investigation first. I'm fairly quickly going to post the link to the Career Advancement Fund in the chat just because I realized that I was talking about it, but would like to probably provide you with that resource. I think that'd be a nice thing for me to do. Um, And while I'm doing that, Isabel, do you have any other tips just about, like, the award, or, the deadline for it is next week, so people are now getting to that, like, kind of like final sprint to the
Mhm.
deadline. Do you have any advice for folks that are kind of at that point in the process?
Yes, knowing me and knowing how I work, I am super glad that like I was gonna say that I started early, but it's not started early even in time. It's just like assume it will take more time than it does. I actually kind of unfortunately like cut off some classwork. So there's some things I turned in late for my classes or like some reading I didn't do, but I don't regret it at all because I did that, which I mean, it could come from another area of your life, like whatever, but I had to make time for this but ultimately like I was able to write an application that I felt really represented why I love Russian so much and like why that kind of is like I feel like that's what they're looking for. No, maybe not just love of the language, but like why it's so important to you and like what you want to do with it aside from just like, oh, it's cool and I want to learn it. Like it took me some time, even though I love it, it actually took me a lot of time to kind of dig that out and realize like, well, what is it? And like how does it fit into my life? And like that's what we met a lot to talk about. Um, so yeah, my advice would just be like put more time into it than you think you might need. And like the more if you can revise it, if you have time for that, that's super helpful. Because what the first thing I wrote, my first completed draft versus the one I turned in were radically different.
I think that you made a good point too there of, like, how does this fit into your life, and, like, forcing yourself to have to talk, like, to actually talk to people about your life, and, like, really, like, communicating that out loud to other people who can kind of help bounce ideas off you, you know? Because I think we had met enough times for me to start to know a lot about your life, right? Um, and so, you know, when you would have an essay that I was reading through, I had a lot of like background information and context about you and your life and your experiences that I could kind of probe and like bounce ideas off. Um, and that doesn't necessarily have to always be a career advisor. Like, I think that's my job. I like to do it. But also, like, that can still be like your friends and your faculty or your family, like people that know you well. And like, if you're talking about yourself in a way that they think isn't doing you justice or like isn't showing your strengths, like, you want to provide your essays to people who care enough about you and know you well enough to be like, I think you could make yourself sound so much more like stronger in this area or showcase your skills in blank in this essay, right? But it means you being vulnerable enough to like give people your drafts. But in general, for almost all fellowships, I've noticed like the more successful a student is, it generally is because they've brought more people into the fold in drafting their application. I kind of want to hear a little bit about like with your recommenders, did you give them like talking points or like your draft, or like did you kind of give them any like specific guidance?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. One of my recommenders actually, I think she actually works to like vet CLS applications or like so she couldn't. I mean, there's a thing where she can write my recommendation, but obviously she wouldn't read my application.
Yeah.
Uh, but so she already knew like the gist of what they're looking for in candidates. So she actually gave me bullet points that I answered for her.
Nice.
But yeah, so she what she wanted to know were like the core questions, like what am I doing like outside of school, like extracurriculars or that sort of thing. But mainly what she wanted to know is that one question that we spoke about at the beginning, like what do I plan to do with Russian in my career? Basically, like that is a fundamental part. Some like I mean, I think for CLS it kind of is. Like most of the people in my cohort were actually poli sci majors or like international relations or something. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, not, you don't have to be, but I, as a lit major, like I felt it was different. It was just, it was interesting. But so that was the key that she had wanted. And I also said the same thing to my other recommender at Reed. I just emphasized that CLS is state funded and that they want that it is focused on like building it into my life. So I just told them like what that would look like for me. And
Yeah.
yeah.
You made sure to actually like have those intentional conversations with them that of like not only like are you applying, but why you're applying.
Yes.
Um, I think that's great. And I think, you know, I've read a lot of recommendations, good and bad. And I found that like in general, like recommenders do want to see you be successful, but they also have a responsibility to be honest, right? So like if you ask a recommender to write for you and they say yes, you know, don't assume that that's like the end of the conversation. Like you like if someone doesn't feel like they know you very well or know why you're applying or they don't know why you would be strong for this award because you haven't really had those conversations, like there's a chance that they will say that in the letter. And I've read those letters where they're like, yes, I've agreed to write for this student. They're a really great student in class. They turn their essays in. You know, I've known this student in this context. Um, I don't know, and like I don't really know why they would be good for this award, but they're a really great person. Like, you know, they'll do their best, but they also have an obligation to be honest. Like people aren't gonna lie or try and make stuff up, right? So it's definitely like your responsibility to, especially for something like this, where CLS isn't a read award, right? Like I think over the past couple of years, more people are applying, but it's not one of the big prominent awards that we're always talking about. So, you know, making sure that faculty members or your recommenders have a lot of context about what, yeah, like to your point, like knowing it's like a government funded award, knowing the point of it, knowing like your goal for it and like seeing your drafts and like giving them so much context and so many pointers. Um, so that way you're not leaving it up to them to have to like try and guess or like infer in their letter because like some people will do that.
And to that, I would add, don't feel shy about reminding professors. So it is always great to give them like heads up, but I find that I know one of mine in particular tends to forget things. So if I give them like two weeks or a month's notice, it's always helpful the week before to just say, hey, this is due in a week. Do you remember? No, but just I had to do that, but I'm glad I did. And it's better to do that than to have a potential like um I don't know, just potential super last minute recommendation or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like ultimately they care enough to want to write for you, but everyone's busy. And so a good way to kind of like ping them without like being like, don't forget is sharing like updates. Like, hey, like here's my next draft or here's my final draft. You
Mhm.
know, and or like reminding them like, oh hey, like just a heads up, like this is how you submit your letter, right? Because each application has a different process for like how you submit it. So like being like, hey, like, here's my draft, like just wanted to make sure you knew also like how to submit your letter when you're ready. And like there's a lot of more like passive ways to touch base with them and still like remind them. um but okay, cool. I think it's really great hearing from you. Especially over COVID. It's like I don't see anyone. So I'm really excited to see you. And it sounds like the program was really great.
Mhm.
It'd be cool to know like what are you working on right now? Or like what's
Ooh.
yeah.
Well, right now, kind of sadly, I don't have any Russian this semester. It's just weird the way everything turned out.
Okay.
But I am so I just actually finished well, relating to the Russian studies, I finished reading Anna Karenina, which is like my first novel in Russian, so I'm super excited about that.
Yay.
And I'm thinking of I don't know, at this point, this is kind of was I was interested in the Ruby Langford because I'm interested in potentially applying. Like um, there's a conference for undergrad students to basically like present papers. So it's like a kind of like less formal um, arena for
Mhm,
us to just practice. So I
mhm.
was thinking of doing something with this over winter break and presenting. It's at like one of the UC schools. I don't remember which one. I don't think it's Berkeley, but um, so yeah, I was hoping to do that and apply for things for next summer too.
So I guess one of my like last question that I'll have for you is just like how, because ultimately like not every single person that applies can win the award, right? So like I guess the silver lining there, because I know that you also, we went through this process together. We had gone through, I think, other application processes together. Like, what can you say in terms of like the silver lining of still going through the process and like how is like practicing for fellowship applications helped you, with these future applications you're applying to?
Yeah, it is. Oh my God. I'm so grateful that I went through this then because I feel like this is prep for my senior year.
Mm,
Uh, and it helped, especially because Russian actually is my like career primary. Like I want to do something with it, although I'm not 100% sure what that will be. The more I'm able to like flesh it out and talk about it, um, it just feels like I'm able to refine something like almost like a resume, but it's not a document. It's just like it's like I'm fleshing out something in myself that I feel like more confident about or clear about. And that was super helpful. And
mhm.
especially like for me, because I feel like more applications in the future will be similar in some way or like relate to a similar like topic, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Like it sounds like you're kind of like in refining almost like your personal narrative. Uh,
Yeah.
and like getting better at like communicating. Like once you kind of really know what your personal narrative is, hopefully it gets better at you get better at communicating it out to others or on an application, which is I mean like that's a skill, right? Like it is like this like really I don't know, like subjective skill that we all kind of like learn along the way. Like Very rarely are you ever sitting in a class that's like, all right, today or for this whole semester, we're just going to talk about personal narrative and like everyone's going to learn it. But like it's something you kind of have to do as you put your feelers out there and try new things and like learn what you like and what you don't like.
Mhm.
It kind of sounds like that's like in doing this, like it's helping you to really like get very narrowed in like what you want to do.
Yeah.
That's great.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to finish up a little bit early. Um, Thank you so much, Isabel, for taking the time to chat with me and for sharing your experience. It's so valuable. I posted in the chat a link to the Career Advancement Fund. So if folks want to check that out or they have questions, like they're more than welcome to reach out to me and I'm happy to chat with them about that. You can make appointments with me in Handshake or shoot me an email. This is my email. Um, and, good luck to everyone. The deadline is coming up. So just, keep in mind, I think my like one last tip for applications when it comes to like submitting an application online is to not wait until the last minute. If you can submit your application potentially like the night before the deadline, just in case there's any technical difficulties. Encourage your recommenders to submit early if they can too. The deadline is November 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And thanks again. All right.